Arnold Schwarzenegger's rise from bodybuilding to Hollywood and politics made him an icon, but there was a dark side behind it. From steroids to allegations from multiple women and a secret that destroyed his marriage, there was a lot happening behind the scenes. Let me break it down. Before there was a Terminator, before there was a Governator, there was a kid named Arnold growing up in a small village called Thal, just outside Graz, Austria. His father, Gustav Schwarzenegger, worked as a police officer and postal inspector in that town, and for most of Arnold's childhood, that's all the public knew about him. Growing up in the small village of Thal in Austria, Schwarzenegger knew very little about his father, who worked as a police officer and postal inspector there. That changed in the late 1980s, when reports started circulating that Gustav had a Nazi past. Arnold didn't ignore it. In July 1990, Schwarzenegger approached Rabbi Marvin Heyerer at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, a Jewish civil rights organization based in Los Angeles, and asked him to conduct an investigation into his father's role in the Second World War. The investigation didn't take long to turn up something concrete. The 2-month-long investigation uncovered that Gustav had applied for membership in the Nazi Party in 1938, just before Germany annexed Austria, and was accepted 3 years later in 1941. At the time, the Wiesenthal Center found no ties to the more senior wings of the party. The Wiesenthal Center found no evidence to suggest Schwarzenegger's father had been part of the Sturmabteilungen or the Schutzstaffel. That was the story for over a decade, a Nazi party membership card, but nothing more sinister on paper. Then in 2003, right as Arnold was gearing up for a run at the California governor's office, the story cracked open again. In August 2003, ahead of his run for governor of California, an LA Times investigation uncovered documents in the Austrian state archives in Vienna, showing Gustav was more heavily involved in Hitler's regime than previously thought. This wasn't just party membership anymore. Reporters found a specific line buried in a mountain of wartime paperwork. The brief entry in one of millions of documents stored at the Austrian State Archives shows that Gustav Schwarzenegger, the late father of the film star now running for governor of California, was a volunteer member of the Sturmabteilung, or SA, the notorious Nazi stormtroopers, also known as brownshirts. The date on that document mattered. The SA 1.51939 listing shows that the elder Schwarzenegger joined May 1, 1939, the year after Germany annexed Austria, and 6 months after the brownshirts played a crucial role in the bloody Kristallnacht riots. So this wasn't some passive, forced-into-it membership card. He signed up as a volunteer. After Kristallnacht, after the violence against Jewish communities had already made headlines across Europe. The reason the Wiesenthal Center missed this back in 1990 wasn't sloppiness. The record simply wasn't public yet. The Wiesenthal Center didn't find the stormtrooper reference in its 1990 investigation, because that record was sealed until last year, 30 years after Gustav Schwarzenegger's death in 1972. So for 13 years, Arnold Schwarzenegger believed he had the full picture of his father's wartime record. He didn't. Gustav's military record backs up how deep the involvement went. He didn't sit out the war behind a desk. Schwarzenegger's father, Gustav, was an active member of the Nazi Party until he was wounded in the Battle of Leningrad in 1943, one of the most brutal sieges of the entire war, and Gustav was in it, on the side that laid siege to the city, until shrapnel took him out of the fight. None of this was some secret Arnold kept hidden from voters. It broke during the actual recall campaign, days before Californians went to the polls. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, which in 1990 investigated Gustav Schwarzenegger's wartime past at his son's request, planned to conduct new research before the Oct. 7 California recall election to establish what the father's unit did, said Rabbi Marvin Heyerer. Heyerer was blunt about where he stood on how it should affect Arnold personally. Whatever the record shows, so may it show, Heyerer told the Associated Press, adding, should that record have any bearing on Arnold Schwarzenegger himself? In my opinion, absolutely not. Arnold's campaign leaned into that same line, insisting the father's record wouldn't touch the son's. His record regarding stamping out intolerance is absolutely rock solid, and he will continue to work closely with the Simon Wiesenthal Center to ensure that the attitudes and actions that occurred in the Nazi era never happen again, spokesman Sean Walsh said. Voters for the most part agreed, the recall went through, and Arnold won anyway. But the story of his rise now had a permanent asterisk sitting at its root. The man who raised him signed up on his own for the most notorious paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, months after Kristallnacht. Decades later, Arnold has used that history in public, turning it into a warning rather than a secret. In a video aimed at Russian soldiers during the invasion of Ukraine, he brought his father back into the conversation on his own terms. He talked candidly about his father, Gustav Schwarzenegger, who was a Nazi soldier during World War II and was part of the invasion of Leningrad, during which he was wounded by shrapnel, according to his son. He's also put his money where his mouth is over the years, according to reporting on his charitable giving. Arnold has adamantly denounced his father's affiliation with the Nazis and has since contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Wiesenthal Center, in addition to continuing work with Jewish foundations. So that's the foundation underneath the poster boy origin story. A father with brown shirt paperwork and a battlefield wound from one of history's ugliest sieges. But the darkness in Arnold's rise didn't stop with his father. The next chapter was written by Arnold himself, in a gym in Southern California, years before anyone called him a movie star. Arnold's actual body, the thing that got him noticed in the first place, the thing that got him cast, that got him famous, didn't come from just push-ups and a diet plan. No matter how the origin story usually gets told, he's admitted it himself more than once across decades of interviews. He first started taking steroids as a teenager, before becoming a famous bodybuilder. Arnold Schwarzenegger first began taking steroids at the age of 20. Some accounts of his early training years put the heaviest period even earlier. It is estimated that the bulk of his steroid use was between the ages of 15 and 17, when he was on a strict diet, and he gained over 50 pounds of muscle in that short time. By the time he was competing at the top level of bodybuilding, the drug use wasn't hidden, it was part of the routine. The whey protein shakes are part of the routine now. He's laid out exactly what he was taking. He told the magazine that he took 100 milligrams of testosterone a week and 15 milligrams of Dianabol a day. Dianabol wasn't some back alley substance at the time. It was a name every serious lifter in that era knew. The framing he's used for decades is that it was legal, medically supervised, and limited to a short window before competitions. I have no regrets about it because, at that time, it was something new that came on the market, and we went to the doctor and did it under doctor's supervision, he told a BC News in 2005. He's repeated a version of that line for over 20 years, framing it as experimentation rather than abuse. We were experimenting with it. It was a new thing, so you can't roll the clock back and say, now I would change my mind on this. He's also been specific about how he tried to manage the risk, at least in his own telling, cycling on and off rather than staying on steroids constantly. So we limited it to a couple months before competition, so that we wouldn't be on it at all times and get hooked, Schwarzenegger stated. But he's also admitted that the pressure to use wasn't really optional if you wanted to compete at that level. If you weren't doing it, you would fall behind. That's not a guy describing a personal choice made in a vacuum. That's a guy describing the entire culture of the sport he became the face of. And it wasn't consequence-free. Reporting on his health history has connected his early drug use to problems that stayed with him for life. Arnold has had heart problems since early in his life, and the steroid use has aggravated it, leading him to have open heart surgery, a detail about his life he kept secret until just recently. The body that made him famous carried the bill for decades after the posing trunks came off. At the time, none of it was illegal. That's the detail that keeps coming up in every interview he's given on the subject. This was before steroids were made illegal in 1990 under Congress Anabolic Steroids Control Act. So legally, Arnold's hands were clean. Culturally, though, he became the walking advertisement for a substance that would go on to devastate the sport long after he'd moved to Hollywood. He's acknowledged that irony directly, admitting the modern bodybuilding world has taken the drug use he pioneered to places he says he never went. Schwarzenegger admitted to using small amounts of steroids early on in his career, but said it was nowhere near the level some bodybuilders are now taking. There's a political footnote to all of this that rarely gets attached to the steroid story, but it belongs here. Years after he'd left the sport and become governor, he had a direct chance to push anti-steroid education into California high schools, and he didn't take it. In 2005, Schwarzenegger vetoed a bill that would have required high school coaches in California to teach about the dangers of steroids and illegal substances. The man whose entire public identity was built on top of a steroid-fueled physique had, as governor, the power to make sure the next generation of California athletes got a warning he never got. He killed the bill. That's the body, that's the muscle, the Mr. Olympia titles, the magazine covers, the Hollywood contract that followed. built, by his own repeated admission, with pharmaceutical help, that the sport quietly normalized, and that he now says he doesn't regret. But the drugs and the gym were never the only thing following him around as his fame grew. There was another storyline building in parallel, one involving the women who crossed his path on movie sets, at gyms and in interview rooms. And when it finally broke into the open, it happened at the worst possible moment for him, 5 days before an election. By the time Arnold Schwarzenegger decided to run for governor of California in 2003, he'd spent 30 years as one of the most photographed men on the planet. He'd also spent 30 years accumulating a reputation that nobody in the mainstream press had fully investigated, until the campaign made him impossible to ignore. The LA Times spent weeks working the story before it ran. The Times said it interviewed the women over the last 7 weeks during an investigation into whether Schwarzenegger harassed women. When it finally published, 5 days before the recall election, it didn't name 1 or 2 accusers. It named 6. 5 days before his election, the Los Angeles Times detailed allegations from 6 women who said Schwarzenegger groped or sexually harassed them between 1975 and 2000. The specifics in that first article were graphic and covered decades. 6 women, including a British television host, accused the Republican action star in interviews with the Los Angeles Times of groping them on movie sets and in other settings over the last 3 decades, the newspaper reported. 2 of them were willing to put their names on the record. 2 of the women allowed their names to be used. 4 spoke on condition of anonymity. Elaine Stockton was one of the named accusers, and her account went back nearly 3 decades before the story even ran. Elaine Stockton told the Times she was groped by Schwarzenegger in 1975 at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach. Then 19, Stockton claimed the bodybuilder came up from behind her and reached under her t-shirt to grab her breast and then silently walked away. She described her own reaction to the paper in blunt terms. "I was just shocked to the point where I almost didn't know how to react, because it was so out of the blue and so unexpected," she told the newspaper. The second named accuser was a British TV host who says the incident happened on the job during a press tour. Anna Richardson, a British television host, said Schwarzenegger touched her breast when she was interviewing him in 2000 on a promotional tour. For the 6th day, Richardson, who previously told Premiere magazine about the alleged incident, was accused by a Hollywood publicist, then working with Schwarzenegger, of fabricating the story. 2 more accounts came from behind the scenes of one of his biggest films. Others interviewed included 2 crew members working in 1990 on Terminator 2: Judgment Day. One account from the Twins set described behavior that went beyond groping into something closer to exposure and physical intimidation. One woman who worked with the actor on the movie Twins said he regularly undressed in front of her in his trailer. She said also that he pulled her onto a bed when he was wearing just his underwear. One of the anonymous women gave the paper a quote that ended up defining the entire story's tone, not about assault in the criminal sense, but about humiliation. "Did he rape me? No," said one woman, who described a 1980 encounter in which she said, "Schwarzenegger touched her breast. Did he humiliate me? You bet he did." His campaign's first response wasn't an apology. It was a denial, and an accusation that the timing was political. Schwarzenegger spokesman Sean Walsh denied the allegations in comments to the Times, saying the actor had not engaged in improper conduct toward women and said the claims were a political attack in the days leading up to the Oct. 7 election. Walsh went further in his framing of who was behind it. "We believe Democrats and others are using this to try to hurt Arnold Schwarzenegger's campaign," Walsh said. "We believe that this is coming so close before the election, something that discourages good, hard-working, decent people from running for office." That denial didn't hold for long. Within a day, Arnold himself was in front of a crowd, changing the tone completely. California gubernatorial recall frontrunner Arnold Schwarzenegger acknowledged that he has behaved badly to women in the past and offered an apology. He delivered it at a rally, trying to pivot the room back toward his campaign message. Schwarzenegger said, "Yes, I have behaved badly sometimes. Yes, it is true that I was on rowdy movie sets and I have done things that were not right, which I thought then was playful, but now I recognize that I offended people." He also tried to have it both ways in the same breath, telling supporters that a lot of what was being reported wasn't accurate. "A lot of what you hear in those stories is not true," Schwarzenegger said. The story didn't stop growing after that first article. It kept expanding through the final days of the campaign. 4 more women surfaced to accuse Schwarzenegger of groping, spanking, or touching them inappropriately, the Los Angeles Times reported, including an unidentified 51-year-old woman who said Schwarzenegger pinned her to him and spanked her repeatedly 3 years earlier at a West Los Angeles post-production studio, and 3 others who said he fondled them outside a Venice gym in the mid-1980s, at a bar in the late 1970s, and on the set of Predator in 1986. By the time voters actually went to the polls, the count had nearly tripled from where it started. 5 days before his election, the Los Angeles Times detailed allegations from 6 women who said Schwarzenegger groped or sexually harassed them between 1975 and 2000. By the Oct. 7 election, the number had grown to 16. Even a Republican rival, running in the same recall race, couldn't stay quiet about it. The behavior that has been alleged is reprehensible. It is disgraceful, said Republican state senator and gubernatorial candidate Tom McClintock. Arnold made one promise in the heat of it that he later walked back entirely. Schwarzenegger apologized for having behaved badly toward women, but refused to discuss the allegations in detail. He pledged to hire an investigator after the election to look into the allegations, but a month later said he would not. He won the recall anyway, taking office as governor, while the allegations sat unresolved, uninvestigated, and legally unpursued. None of the women approached the newspaper on her own, or has filed legal action against the actor. Years later, long after he'd left Sacramento, Arnold revisited the entire episode with a very different tone than the campaign trail denial. He told an interviewer that looking back, he knew he'd crossed lines. Looking back, I stepped over the line several times, and I was the first one to say sorry, he said. I feel bad about it and I apologize. When I became governor, I wanted to make sure that no one, including me, ever makes this mistake. He told Men's Health, that's why we took sexual harassment courses, to have a clear understanding from a legal point of view, and also from a regular behavior point of view of what is accepted and what is not. Legally, none of it ever went further than the newspaper's pages. Schwarzenegger, who left the governor's office in 2011, was not criminally charged in connection with any of the allegations about him. But he didn't walk away from the broader question of who he is as a man. Even when pressed on it directly, he told Men's Health he has not changed his views on masculinity, saying, "I'm a guy. I would not change my view of who I am." That was 2003. The story could have ended there. An ugly chapter from a single campaign, apologized for, absorbed, survived. But 8 years later, while he was still governor, a second story was quietly building inside his own house. And when it broke, it didn't just embarrass him, it ended his marriage. Arnold Schwarzenegger married Maria Shriver in 1986, and for 25 years, they were one of the most recognizable couples in American public life. Kennedy family royalty paired with Hollywood muscle, and eventually the First Lady of California standing next to her governor husband. Then, in a matter of weeks, it all came apart. The public first learned something was wrong when the couple announced a split. Arnold Schwarzenegger's former housekeeper spoke out about having a child with the ex-governor after the scandal exploded into public view, when Schwarzenegger and wife Maria Shriver announced they were splitting up. After 25 years of marriage, followed a week later by an admission by the former 2-term governor that he fathered a child with a member of the household staff. The woman at the center of it was named Mildred Bina, and she wasn't some stranger who'd crossed his path once. Bina reportedly worked for Schwarzenegger and Shriver for 20 years. That's 2 decades inside the family home, in and out of the house, while the Schwarzenegger kids grew up around her. The timeline of how the affair and the births lined up is what made the story so hard for the public to look away from. On Sept 27, 1997, Maria gave birth to Christopher Sargent Shriver Schwarzenegger, the couple's 4th and youngest child. Just 5 days later, Schwarzenegger's out-of-wedlock son with Patty was born. 2 children from 2 different mothers, born less than a week apart, under the same roof. Bina tried to keep the paternity hidden on paper for years. Bina used a different last name, Pina, on the birth certificate, and also listed her then-husband, not the future governor, as the birth father. But the marriage that was supposed to be covering for the affair didn't last either. According to her divorce filing, and just 21 days after the birth of the child he was made to believe was his, Patty separated from her husband of 10 years. The affair itself happened, by Arnold's own later account, while Maria was out of town with their kids. Schwarzenegger reveals having sex with Bina in 1996 in the guest house of his California mansion when not filming Batman and Robin. Shriver was away on vacation with their 4 children, and in one detail that made the story especially uncomfortable, he chose not to fire Bina afterward. He kept her employed. Schwarzenegger kept Bina as a housekeeper because he believed it would control the situation. He's since admitted he didn't come clean about the child for years, even to himself at first. Arnold admitted he did not know if Joseph was his son in the beginning, but as the child got older, it became clear to Arnold that was the case, and then it became more about keeping the situation a secret. By his own math, that secret sat inside his marriage for the better part of a decade. By then, Schwarzenegger said he had known he'd fathered the child for 5 or 6 years. What makes the timing especially damning is that this whole story was happening underneath the 2003 groping allegations, while Maria was publicly standing by her husband against accusations from other women. She had no idea about the one closer to home. Shriver, who initially brushed off the Times reporting of her husband's indiscretions as nothing more than gutter politics, could no longer stand by her man. Once his secret love child was revealed, the truth finally came out. Through a marriage counselor, not through Arnold volunteering it. Schwarzenegger also denied to Shriver that he'd had an affair, and that Bina's child was his son, until Shriver confronted him during a marriage counseling session a few months before their breakup. She said, "Am I off on this or am I not?" And I said, "You are absolutely correct." He's since called it the worst decision of his life. He called the ordeal the stupidest thing I've done in the whole relationship, and one that ultimately spurred his divorce. He didn't dodge the damage it caused, either, not to Maria, and not to the 4 children they'd raised together. "I inflicted tremendous pain on Maria and unbelievable pain on the kids," he said of his other 4 children. Bina eventually gave her own account of how Shriver found out. And it wasn't through a lawyer or a private investigator. It came from household gossip about a resemblance. Bina said Shriver sensed something was up after hearing whispers in the household about Joseph's resemblance to Schwarzenegger. When Shriver finally asked directly, Bina says the moment broke her down completely. Bina said Shriver finally asked her point blank whether her son had been fathered by Arnold, and Bina said she got so emotional that she fell down on her knees in front of her. By Bina's account, Shriver responded with more grace than anyone expected. "She cried with me and told me to get off my knees. We held each other and I told her it wasn't Arnie's fault, that it takes 2. Maria's own later writing about that period paints a much darker, private picture than the composed public image she held during the marriage. She's described collapsing alone after everything surfaced. "As I sat on the hotel room floor, in the dark, terrified and alone with tears streaming down my face," she wrote in an excerpt of her book, "I thought to myself, Maria, this doesn't have to be the end of the you. It can't be the end of you." It's worth sitting with how long this affair actually sat buried before it surfaced. The affair happened in 1996. The public didn't learn about it until 2011, 15 years of silence, kept in the same house, where the child grew up alongside his half-siblings. Schwarzenegger goes on to describe the affair with his married housekeeper and their son Joseph, a secret he kept from Shriver for 15 years. So by 2011, the picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger's private life had gone from campaign trail scandal to full-blown family collapse. A father with a hidden Nazi past he only learned about in adulthood. A body built partly on drugs he now says he doesn't regret. A trail of women accusing him of groping and harassment that nearly derailed his run for governor. And a 15-year secret inside his own marriage that finally blew it apart. All 4 of those threads were sitting there at once, underneath the image of the guy on the magazine covers and the movie posters. Look at all 4 pieces together, and the picture stops looking like isolated scandals and starts looking like a pattern that ran the whole length of Arnold Schwarzenegger's climb. Each one surfaced at a different moment, forced into the open by a different person. A rabbi he asked to dig into his own father. A newspaper investigation 5 days before an election. A marriage counselor who finally asked the question directly. Arnold rarely volunteered any of it first. He confirmed it after someone else already had the paperwork. That's the through line, not that he built something remarkable. He clearly did. Going from a village outside Graz to 7 Mr. Olympia titles, to a Hollywood career to the governor's mansion. The through line is how much of that path ran through things he kept quiet until he had no other choice. The father's SA membership sat behind him for over a decade before archivists in Vienna dug it up. The steroid use stayed part of a locker room secret across the entire golden era of bodybuilding, right up until the culture around it changed enough that admitting it became almost fashionable. The groping allegations sat scattered across 3 decades of movie sets and gyms, until one newspaper decided to call every woman at once. And Joseph Bina existed for 14 years before his own father said his name out loud in public. Even the accountability that did come was partial. Arnold apologized to the women in 2003, but he never followed through on the investigator he promised. He pledged to hire an investigator after the election to look into the allegations, but a month later said he would not. He's since reframed the entire episode in more personal terms rather than legal ones, landing on a version of the story where he crossed lines but was never formally held to account for it. He was not criminally charged in connection with any of the allegations about him. The steroid chapter followed the same pattern of partial reckoning. He's talked openly, repeatedly, about using dianabol and testosterone under medical supervision as a young competitor, always circling back to the same defense: it wasn't illegal yet, and everyone else in the sport was doing it too. If you weren't doing it, you would fall behind. That's an honest account of the culture. It's also, conveniently, a framing that puts the responsibility on the sport, rather than on the man who became its most famous face, and who later, as governor, had a direct chance to mandate steroid education in high schools and chose to veto it instead. The Nazi Father chapter resolved the most cleanly, if only because the facts were the least ambiguous. Gustav volunteered for the Brown Shirts months after Kristallnacht, fought at Leningrad, and never got the chance to answer for any of it in his own lifetime. He died in 1972, long before the documents surfaced. Arnold's response to it, from the 1990 Wiesenthal Center investigation, all the way through his 2022 trip to Auschwitz and his message to Russian soldiers during the Ukraine invasion, has been consistent: distance himself from it publicly, fund the organizations that investigate it, and use his father's history as a warning rather than bury it. Whatever verdict you reach on his father's actions, Arnold never tried to rewrite or minimize the specific facts once the archive gave them up. The marriage collapse is the one thread with no clean ending at all, just an aftermath that both people involved have kept talking about publicly for over a decade. Maria has written about the moment she learned the truth in language that reads more like trauma than betrayal. Mildred Bina has spoken about the affair with something closer to regret than resentment, saying outright it takes two. And Joseph Bina has grown into an adult in the public eye, a young man who spent over a decade of his childhood not fully knowing who his father was, watching that answer become international news the moment it finally came out. So does the rise carry a dark truth underneath it? By any measure, yes, not one single secret, but 4 of them, stacked across 3 decades, each one surfacing only when someone outside Arnold Schwarzenegger forced the issue. The body, the marriage, the campaign, even the family name he inherited. All of it came with a bill that got paid in public, on someone else's timeline, not his own. That's the part of the story the magazine covers never showed. The muscle, the movies, the governorship, all of it stayed real. But so did everything sitting underneath it, waiting for the archive, the newspaper, or the therapist's office to bring it into the light.